Okay, everybody, let's jump in. So we will have a list of attendees for today, but for purposes of updating your completion dates on your unemployment insurance work search plan, you will need to log into your unemployment account at uimn.org, then click Reemployment Services and record today's date to show that you have completed the Creative Job Search workshop. So you're still welcome to attend all of the sessions, of course, but if you want to record today's date, you'll need to do that on uimn.org. Okay, so this week we've got tools of the job hunting trade, most specifically resumes. Given this breakdown, we will try to make sure that we really stay on task talking about resumes. And the bottom line here is that resume getting you interviews? Are you targeting your resume to the job posting before you click submit? If not, this session will help you understand why targeting your resume is so important and how to do it. We will discuss resume formatting, applicant tracking software, accomplishment statements, and touch briefly on cover letters as well. So let's really quick talk about employment applications. Why on earth do they ask us for both an application and a resume? Is this to torture us? Go ahead and type your theories in the chat box. The biggest difference that I can draw for you is that one is a form created by the employer and the other is a marketing document created by you. So always read through the instructions, as much of the application as possible, to see what it entails. Give yourself plenty of time when you're doing an application for an employer. An average application may take around an hour to complete. Plus, you'll need a few hours to target your resume to the job posting, and another half an hour roughly to draft a cover letter that's targeted. You want to make sure that you fill out everything. Use the words not applicable if that's necessary, but don't leave anything blank on the application. Read the small print. Include your signature confirming accuracy and the truth of the information you provided. And keep good records. Each employer is likely going to require you to create at least a password. Write it down. Put it in a spreadsheet. Just keep good records however you do it. This is one of the most common and most agonizing struggles we see in our career lab when we're open. Remember that the application is one of the first impressions that you'll leave with the employer, so make sure it's a good one. So you'll notice the reoccurring theme in my message to you today is target every resume every time. Include the relevant information only. And after completing our section of Creative Job Search today, we would like you to understand key resume basics and basic resume sections. We'd like you to know the importance of targeting each resume. We'd like for you to understand your formatting choices and the importance of using the right one for you. And know what an accomplishment statement is and how it's used to sell your skills. And then finally, we'll talk briefly about the advantage of sending a cover letter and the basic content you'll want to include. There is no exact formula to resume writing. If there was, you wouldn't need us. It's both an art and a science. CareerForce staff offer best practices and strategy advice, so please keep this in mind as you digest some of our observations and suggestions. The most important thing is that you are comfortable with your resume so that you can confidently sell your skills and background when you're at the interview. The more you read and research, the more you are bound to find there is conflicting advice out there. When this happens, first ask yourself about the context. Is this advice directed to a job seeker of a specific industry or with a certain background or in a certain situation? And then second, ask yourself, is this what's right for me in my job search? The only real test for your resume is whether or not it's generating interviews for you. Resumes. Where do you start? How do you learn to target this every time? You don't want to recreate the wheel, but you do want to make sure that you are specifically talking to the employer about the role that they have advertised. So you start with taking your cues from the employer's job posting. Let's take a look at a couple of examples here. So how do you figure out what's relevant to the employer? The job posting. This is a very short job posting here. In order to target your resume to the posting, you must really study it and plan kind of a strategy or your attack. You'll need to analyze that job posting to form your strategy. So you can do this a myriad of ways. And again, we will be sending you the speaker notes along with the slides from our presentation today. But one idea is that you could go out to a search engine and look for a free word cloud. Or you could go to the website jobscan.co for free scans of your resume. Those are 5 free scans per month per email address. Or I'll show you a manual method that you could use. So in order to target your resume to the job posting, you've got to study it, right? So in this first study step, I've identified action words and I've bolded them and put them in green ink to have those stand out to me, to see if I'm using the same action words in my resume. And then with the second step, I've looked for specific keywords and key phrases. And you'll notice here that I've taken their paragraph form from the posting and I've created my own checklist. And that checklist remains fluid, as I might not squeeze every keyword or phrase from their sentences into just one of my accomplishment statements. So do what works for you. This is just one way that you might study and analyze and come up with a strategy to make sure that you are really speaking their language and targeting your resume each time. My third step of study and analyze is to look for patterns. For today's purposes, we've used this short example first. However, most postings are long enough to reveal more telling patterns. So on the next slide, I've included information from a different posting. Here, I've completed steps 1 and 2, the action words and the keywords and phrases. I've highlighted those. And then in my third step to look for patterns, root words are counted and priorities start to emerge. So in this case, my recommendation to the job seeker was to ensure that those 3 highest important words showed up prominently on the top third or top half of their resume. The words program or programs and publicity and public and planning or plans came up respectively 9 times, 7 times, and 5 times. Significantly more than the rest of the keywords that we picked out on this particular posting for this particular job seeker. And yes, another reminder that we will be sending out the presentation slides and the speaker notes along with like JobScan Co. and other URLs that we've mentioned. All right, we have a quick break and I see Art is here and ready.
I was waiting. So yes, we do have a question. For your job history in an application, is it better to copy the resume contact directly from your resume into the application or to write something different?
I would take that opportunity to write something different. If you are repeating yourself, that could be perceived a few different ways, that you didn't have enough to tell them, that you were too lazy to write something different. Who knows what the perception of the person taking in the applications and resumes will think. But this is your opportunity to tell them a little bit more. So the way that you write things in the application is, of course, going to be dictated by the amount of room that you're given and how they've listed things. You know, some of them are very specific. They want to know your top 5 tasks and they want you to rank them, or they want you to put percentages next to them. And sometimes you'll just get 3 or 4 lines of kind of essay. So again, you kind of have to have a strategy given what their application dictates. But I would definitely take the opportunity to put something different on the application and the resume.
So I do have a follow-up question to that. What about those applications that have you upload your resume and it auto-fills your application? Do you then edit that information, or how would you handle that?
Absolutely. Every time that you upload something and it's used to autofill, whether it's the application or maybe a resume template that they have, make sure you go through every single blank, every single field, and make sure that you can see that you've answered their question in their format. A good example of this going wrong is when you are asked to upload or put in a resume to minnesotaworks.net, the state's labor exchange site. Um, it it has very specific boxes, and depending on how you've formatted your resume, it may not put everything in the correct box. So it might show up unknown, which is not a good sign, or it might just show up blank. And it might paste something both in the objective and in the summary verbatim. So anytime you upload, whether it's to a job seeking board or an application or anywhere on an employer site, make sure you go through and you look and make sure that everything looks very good for you. Because like I said, this is one of your first impressions on the employer, so you want to make sure it's a good one. Be very careful with those. Okay, so we will slide on over to our next slide. So when you're doing your resume, it's not a complete history. It's only a preview. Think of it like a movie trailer. It's just enough to get the reader, the employer, interested and wanting to know more about you. It should be a quick and easy read. There should be clear sections, and accomplishment statements will not be written in full sentences. It's not an essay, it's a marketing document, and it will be skimmed eventually by a human eye. So make sure it's quick and easy to read. Remember, it is a fluid document, and so its purpose is to get you an interview. So if it's not working for you right now, change it. Feel free to change it. Give yourself permission to change it until it starts to do its job for you. So in the chat box, I'd like you to take a guess at this question. Give me a number here. How many seconds, on average, will an employer spend reviewing your resume the first time they go through your resume? First 2 answers, 6, 30, 45, 60, 11 seconds, less than 30 seconds. Great, great guesses here. It really roughly amounts to about 10 to 17 seconds is what we see in some employer and recruiter reviews. So on the next one here, I want to show you kind of a visual. Let me explain what you're looking at. This is an image that comes from the ladders.com showing the heat from a recruiter's eyeballs as they move over to resumes. On the left are dense chunks of text and really wide margins. On the right are more clear and separated sections and some spaced out text. Notice how the recruiter did not even finish reading the one on the left. I always think about when I'm pointing this out in class that over here on the right margin, They might have zoned out a little bit and started making their grocery list or thought about what they were going to make for dinner that night. Whereas when you're on the right-hand side, you can see that they really did a lot of focusing down here. And you may not be able to see it, but I can tell you that this is the education section. And for some recruiters, they know that it is a deal breaker if a certain candidate does not have a particular credential. So that could be why they study that so hard. But I've always thought that this visual really helps me with the appearance of a resume, you know, that holding it at arm's length and kind of looking through it real quickly to see if it's easy and quick to read. Okay, so we also want to make sure that our resumes are scannable. This is very difficult because you're both creating a targeted resume each time for both automated systems and a human eye. So know that most application materials will be scanned by software during the first review before reaching a human eye. Be aware that any fancy kind of font can be misread by scanning software used by many organizations to initially screen applicant documents. And so what we call those are applicant tracking software, or ATS. And sometimes they can only read text. They can't read text boxes, they can't read tables. A lot of them might have a hard time with italics because things are slanted and they can easily, the letters can touch each other. Absolutely, when you're underlining things, that line can touch things and it can garble your text when that ATS is reading the text in your resume. Now more strategy as far as content. Make sure that you are speaking their language. If your previous employer terms the people that you serve as customers, but the employer whose job posting you're targeting uses the term guests, then change that term on your resume from customers to guests. If they list a strong candidate will be detail-oriented in the qualifications, change your wording from high attention to detail to detail-oriented, thereby speaking their language. Do some research. Look around at the application page for the ATS brand name, and then do a search for that ATS name and see what you can find as far as tips on submitting a resume through that particular ATS. Now, resumes should always be honest. Any inaccurate information could cost you your job later if you were to be hired. So focus on skills and things that you have achieved or accomplished rather than just tasks or duties that you performed. Employers are more interested in results. So focus the resume on a particular job. If you try to include all of your experience and skills from your entire life of work, you can make it harder for the employer to imagine you in their position. So for example, don't confuse them by putting forklift experience on a resume that you're targeting for a restaurant position. Targeting your resume to a particular job helps the employer see how qualified you are and increases the likelihood that you will be called for an interview. So remember, to job seekers, the resume is a selling tool. To employers, it's a screening or an elimination tool. Use keywords and key phrases to stand out in an applicant tracking system scan that identify and eliminate interview candidates based on keywords or more accurately, the lack thereof them. So choose a resume format that best presents your skills relative to the job description you're targeting. Generally speaking, no matter what format, the top third of your page is very key. Make sure that the reader immediately sees your intention. What is your desired job title. It can be just a professional title, an industry. You could call it an objective. It could be a profile or a summary statement, but you need to let them know your intention. It must grab the employer's attention during this first half of the page. Now, as far as appearance, you will need some white space. Avoid using dense paragraphs. Use bullets. It helps the eyeball jump from one thing to the next. Now, margins can be a minimum of up to a ½ inch, but probably no more than an inch. That gets a little large. For easiest readability, most of us need to see a size 10 to size 12 point font. And there's no reason and no need to waste valuable space with the line references upon request at the bottom. It's no longer trendy in resume fashion, and it's implied that you'll provide references when they are asked for. Now, unless references are requested, do not send them right away. Start with the basics. Put in that application, your targeted cover letter and targeted resume, unless the advertisement calls for something additional. If references are requested, go ahead and place them on a separate sheet with the same name and contact block that you used on your cover letter and resume. We want to make sure that you are targeting your resume each and every time, no matter which format you choose. And honestly, there's no blanket advice. We can tell you some advantages and disadvantages of each type of format, but we need to have a more extensive conversation with you to give you specific formatting and strategy advice to you specifically. All right, Art, looks like we have more questions.
Sorry, Marnie. Yeah, I didn't want to break in. I'm going to turn off my video just to conserve bandwidth. So there's a few questions we have, and I really like this question because it's asking for clarification. So if we put different information on our resume and our application, where do we put the most relevant information? If we tailor our resume, it seems the information should be on both. Kind of clarify your point on that.
Absolutely. So remember the difference between the two. The form, the application form, is something that they ask you to fill out, and you're simply filling in their blanks. The resume that you create is going to be more of a document that is a marketing tool. So when you're filling out the application, you absolutely have to put in every job, every piece of education as it is requested. And you might be more dry, I guess, in that application, and be more aggressive and assertive in your resume. So I might list duties or tasks as they ask me to in an application, but when I write about those tasks in a resume, I'm going to do it more in an accomplishment statement. And a little further down here in our presentation, we will talk more about what is an accomplishment statement. And how do I take a task that's just humdrum every day for me and put it into an accomplishment?
All right, I do have another question, and this is one we get quite a bit. So if this is a question you have, don't feel bad. It's asked all the time. When you say you're going to have to customize your resume to every single job you do, does that mean you're rewriting the whole thing? How much extra time does this take once you have your standard, meet and greet resume? How long should this take to make it a specific marketing piece?
You are going to get better and better at this every time you do it. But I love to tell the story of, like, I have 4 siblings, and each of them has asked for me to help them with their resume. And it's never like hey, Marnie, I want to send this resume, when I graduate in 3 months or when I am ready to apply in 2 weeks. It's, I want to do this tonight. Can you come over? And so I preface the, sure, I'd love to come over and help you, but this is going to take a little while because we haven't been working up to it. You want to do this right now? It's going to take 3 to 4 hours for me to really understand the job posting that you put together and or that you are targeting, and then the resume that you need to put together. If somebody starts with something, anything, if they walk in the door and they say, I've written down my job history on this notebook, it's a great place to start. At least we aren't starting from square one, maybe going out to ONET online and figuring out, okay, so where did you work last? Okay, tell me where you worked before that. Now we'll, start to get this history going, and then we'll make it into accomplishment statements, ultimately for a resume that's targeted to a specific job. I would say that on average, because I've got so many resumes saved, when I go to rewrite, it maybe only takes me an hour to an hour and a half or 2 hours when I'm rewriting to really target a resume. Now, I am sort of a nerd that way. And so I would say for you, it maybe doesn't need to take that long. Plus, you've got myself and all the other Career Force location staff to help you out. Once you draft something and you start to check, okay, I'm meeting these keywords. Yep, I am using the same uh, action words that they've used. I'm going to send this in and I'm going to have, Art or Marnie or Robin or whomever do a review of it for me. And then you'll find out, okay, how am I doing at targeting this? And people get better every time. I've had them send me job postings and resumes more than once, and people really start to see what they have to do. And if you've got a focus or even 2 or 3 focuses as far as desired job titles in your job search, you are really going to start to hone in what you need to say and how you need to say it on a resume. There is no easy formula, as I said at the beginning. It does take time and it can be tedious, but you all know your subject matter so well. It's just a matter of getting you to speak about it in an accomplishment statement form. And that's what we're here to help with.
Just to add to that, I have had very successful applications in as little as 10 minutes in some cases. It depends on how similar the job you are now applying to was to the last job you applied to. And if it's just maybe there's 2 medical facilities in your area and you're applying to be a nurse at each one, you should still customize because they will describe the same skills in different terms. And sometimes it takes as little as 10, 15 minutes. Sometimes it takes longer. It's quality over quantity in my estimation in job search. I'd much rather someone turn in 1 or 2 quality applications than try to apply for everything with the same resume. Generally, it
Absolutely.
does lead to better results. Do you have one more question here? We're getting a lot of questions about how far to go back and issues of showing your age. What do you think about how many years to go back? And then also, when should you cut off graduation years? At what point should you cut off graduation years in your resume?
Sure. So first, again, I want to differentiate between the application and the resume. In the application, when you are answering their questions, if they say, please list your employment history for the past 7 years, then it's only the employers you work for in the last 7 years. If they ask you to list your last 3 employers, then it's only your last 3 employers. And if you've worked for someone for 20, 30, 40 years, then you probably only need to put in 1 or 2 things. And maybe you don't have anything, maybe you started right out of high school at a place and you didn't have a high school job. So maybe you just have that one employer to put in on a application. Now, on a resume, it might look a little different. If you are that lifer, that one employer person, Maybe you talk about your different kind of tours of duty for that employer. Where did you start out? Where did you end up? And what were the stops in between? Now, sometimes we've had people who have done mostly the same job for those 30 years, and there's a way to do your resume that we can show you. Again, we want to talk with you specifically about your specific personal strategy, your unique situation, and then that drives the way you are going to put your resume together. For most people, this again is a big generalization, but you'll see in a lot of places we talk about 10 to 15 years of history. Now, some of us might have stuff from 20 years ago that's more relevant to the employer that we're applying to right now, so you might still want to use that. You could go back in time until a certain point and then keep listing employers and job titles, but just put previously. Um, you could have two separate sections of work experience. You could do this just a ton of different ways. Um, for education, when someone has graduated within the last 3 to 5 years, that is more important. And sometimes we'll even say 2 to 3 years. Um, so those recent graduates, having that been their most significant achievement of late, they might have their education sections higher up on the resume than most job seekers. Most of us are going to have that down in the bottom half and usually being the last section of the resume. And I would say after 3 years, I would generally encourage somebody to put more information about their jobs that they've held, because those accomplishments that they've done through holding those jobs have been more significant um, than the education. However, there's always an exception to that rule. If they haven't used the education yet, then, that might look different. So, yeah, education dates are going to be required on most application forms, but they're not necessarily required on resumes. Remember, it's a marketing document.
We're questions in, we'll get as we can, but this will be the last one for this section, and then we'll move on. Um, we get a lot of questions about, how to address being overqualified. Before I let Marnie tackle that, I'm going to mention that I'll be sending everyone a document on how to deal with those issues specifically. However, no matter what information we give you today, in that situation, it's a really good idea to reach out to your local career force representative to talk through it, because there's just so many variables. But Marnie, as a general rule, if you have had jobs way above what you're looking for right now, how do you get an interview without, being filtered out by being overqualified?
Absolutely. So I have had this conversation with a lot of job seekers lately because, as Art said, we are getting this question a lot. Um, the biggest thing that I ask those job seekers to work on is their networking efforts. Before we even work on a resume, I really want to know what they've done for networking, because most of the time that word of mouth is still the biggest way people get jobs. And especially if you're doing a career change, or if you've been deemed overqualified because what you're applying for does not necessarily require that bachelor's or that master's degree, you are going to need to talk to people in the industry that you are targeting and let people know what it is exactly that you are looking for. Now, that said, after someone has done the work of maybe reaching out to former coworkers or colleagues and reaching out to cold calling, emailing, video chatting online, targeting specific companies, having informational interviews. After they've done that work and they really have a specific job posting that they want to target, Then on that resume, I would say where you're going to be very intentional, especially with that piece on the top third with what their intention is. So it might say, you know, seasoned professional seeking a very specific role, you know, bringing this experience, but wanting to mentor or wanting to do X, Y, and Z, so that you are very intentional of it is you want, no matter what the rest of your background says in your application. What you're after is this specific role. And then you can explain why when you are networking and in a targeted cover letter. Um, like Art said, this is a very intricate way of writing a resume, because it's not just this easy glance, yep, I understand what this person, you know, does or wants to do. It's a transitionary period for a lot of people. And so you definitely need to reach out to somebody at your local career force location and have a conversation with them and show them what you're targeting and then how you've targeted it with the resume, and see if they can help you do that any differently in order to get different results. Okay, so again, gotta really pound this in here. Target every time, no matter which format you choose. And we'll move on to an example of the chronological resume. So chronologicals highlight recent employment while de-emphasizing jobs that are held years ago. This is best for people with a consistent employment history and no gaps in employment. It may not be the best format for individuals with job gaps, recent graduates, or people who are changing careers. It starts out with the most recent work history and it moves back in time. And the work history, especially the most recent, should be consistent with the career goal or intention or the summary statement or objective, whatever you call that intention. This should use about 10 to 15 years of work history or the last 3 jobs. And again, these are general statements about chronological, giving you kind of, again, those advantage and disadvantages of this particular format. And then again, generally speaking, functional resumes really focus on skills and accomplishments in targeted skill sets that you want to be offering targeted employers. This is recommended for really new job seekers. Say someone who's right out of high school, they want to advertise the courses that they've taken, maybe some volunteering that they've done, personal development and things like that, in order to entice an employer to take a chance on them and bring them in for an interview. Now, the combination, the best of both worlds. It's, in my experience, it's the easiest to target to a specific job posting, because your job history always stays the same, but the stuff that you are deeming relevant might change. Like Art said, even if you're applying for an RN position, but it's at 2 different locations, those locations might have specific job posting requirements that are different from each other, given their specialties or just their philosophy as an employer. Generally speaking, combinations are probably the most commonly used. It allows you to really focus the top 2/3 of the document on those accomplishments that are relative to your target, and it allows you to condense your work history into a concise chronological list. All right, so now we're going to hit some of the basic resume parts. The first one being your name block. It's your contact info. Use your full name, no nicknames. But if you go by a shortened version, feel free to do as we've shown here with Elizabeth as Liz. Many agree that removing your street address is a good idea. Not only can it be a security concern for folks, but it can also allow you to be geographically profiled. No doubt it will be required on the application, however. As a best practice, we do encourage job seekers to pick one phone number just to make it simpler on the prospective employers. Make certain that that number that you use is the one that you're going to answer most of the time. And for most people, this will be a cell phone. However, there's no need to label it as such. A phone number's use is implied by its format. So labels can just add added clutter that distract from your essential information. Be very aware of your outgoing voicemail message. Make sure you keep it professional. I do not want to hear any ringback tones, music, Bible verses, anything extra. Your full name, that you're going to get back to them as soon as possible, and thanking them for calling. That's all you need. Be aware of your email address and the impression that it can give of you. Make sure that you keep it professional. Maybe avoid any 2 to 4 digit numbers that would appear to be the year of your birth or a graduation date or something like that. If you are active and your profile is complete and up to date, go ahead and include a LinkedIn profile or WorkHands profile. That is helpful to the prospective employers when they want to hear more about you. All right, so again, your intention might be titled objective, profile, summary statement. At any rate, whatever it's titled, or maybe it's even not titled, you don't have to do that. It should be very specific to the job that you're applying for. Avoid any very wordy statements that start with generic introductions, such as seeking a challenging position with a growing company. Who does that statement serve? You. It's all me, me, me. We want you to remove any instances of I, me, or my from your resume. Avoid me-oriented words and phrases in general on your resume. Instead, offer the value the employer will gain by hiring you. So for example, you could say, seeking part-time position in the floral industry, offering expertise in merchandise trimming and preparation at high standards, and a record of always operating with the best interests of the employer in mind. This focuses more on the employer and their needs versus looking for a rewarding part-time job in the floral industry with room for growth and advancement. That rewarding, that advancement, that growth, that's me, me, me. But if you focus on what the employer needs, that's going to catch you more looks. All right, so list your most recent employer first and then work backwards in time. You can also use your volunteer experience. Just indicate that properly. Last week I did watch a career seeker advice YouTube video that talked about never using the word volunteer, but I think that's up to you. Our point here is that you can include both paid and unpaid positions in your experience. So however you do that is fine, just as long as it's relevant to the position that you're applying for. So with education, again, you're going to list the most recent education first and then work backwards in time. If you have any college, any post-secondary experience or credits at all, you do not need to list high school. Now, as we discussed earlier, education dates are optional. Know that those education dates can suggest your age and how current your academic knowledge is. So take that into account and consider leaving those dates off the resume if they're older than 3 to 5 years. Plus, you can bet that this detailed information will likely be required in an employer's application. If the targeted position is unrelated to the subject studied, you can leave that off. And you can list any training or continuing education that is relevant to the job that you are seeking, also in this section. All right, one more slide and we've got a quick break. So, other things that you might put on the resume as far as sections could be listing organizational memberships related to the job target. You could include awards or any recognition that you've received for your work. Often I see these put down at the bottom of resumes, and I will ask, why bury these? If you've got some recognition for work that you've done exceptionally well, maybe think about moving that further up in your resume. Burying it at the bottom does you no favors. So think about that when you look at templates that encourage that organization or that arrangement. If they are related to the target job, you may list hobbies or interests. However, this is another thing that is kind of passé in resume fashion. So if you love reading mystery novels and you are applying to work at Barnes and Noble or a publishing house or something like that, then absolutely go ahead and list that as a hobby. However, if you are doing something that is completely unrelated to your hobby, no need to list those on your resume. And the last kind of beware here is be cautious of including any affiliations that could be polarizing. So political parties, religious denominations, things like that. You can still list them, just be more neutral in how you label them on the resume. All right, Art, any questions?
Yes, got a couple of questions. We did get a couple of questions about LinkedIn. I tried to deal with those as much as I could in the chat. We will have the LinkedIn class, basically, as social media class is the next job club. But generally, for those of you who are wondering if it's right for you, that really depends on the industry you're going into and your comfort level. But I'd highly recommend taking a look at that and seeing you. Did get a couple questions about in relation to LinkedIn. If you're taking some LinkedIn courses or some Coursera courses, a lot of people are doing online courses during the situation we're all in. What is their relation to what should be put on the resume? Kind of what's the rule for putting those types of things on a resume?
Okay. Again, I would love to give you a set of rules, but that's just not how this job search game works. However, generally speaking, your LinkedIn profile should be in alignment with the resumes that you're sending out. So that's easy if you've always been an airline pilot and you always want to be an airline pilot. But it's a little trickier if you want to do something different than what you've done before. So definitely, like Art said, have that conversation with a career force staff. Watch the workshop or the recordings and get an idea of how much work it takes to not only create a LinkedIn profile, but be active and participate and engage in LinkedIn. So the bottom line answer there is it depends, which I know can be infuriating, but that's how a lot of my answers to job seekers start. So I would need a little bit more information about if you have one that exists at all, how you're using it currently, what you used to do or what you've done in your career, and where you're going in your career. So generally speaking, the two should align somehow.
Okay. Quick, when I do an instant feedback on a question that just came in, it says, how do we get connected to a workforce staff person, workforce staff person, career force staff person? I will be sending everyone the contact information for all 50 locations throughout the state. So when you get that, take a look at the closest town to you. You either call or send an email. And resume review is one of the easiest ways to start that relationship. Don't let it end with that though, because in my area, I did a mock interview for someone just yesterday. And they can do mock interviews, they can do career assessments, they can do all sorts of things, but you first need to make that personal connection, and it can start off with a resume review. So I'll give you the contact information for that. Did have another question, two more questions real quick, and then I'll let you go through the rest of the material and we'll get to the rest of the questions if we can. If you've been in college for a while, but you didn't complete. At what point is that relevant to list on your resume, and how would you list it? So you didn't get a degree, but you put in time. Like say you did 2 or 3 years of college.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and that's going to be a lot of people, right?
Mhm.
So I personally would like to see how many credits you earned. If you've really tried and you can't find that out, I would at least like to know how many semesters you spent, or I would encourage the job seeker to give me some sort of tangible, measurable amount of time that they spent. And that I would list versus listing the high school diploma, because you did go on to a post-secondary education, even if you didn't achieve that diploma, certificate, or degree.
Yeah, I mean, if some it's actually one of the filters on some of the applications. So,
Mhm.
I mean, take credit for what you did. It certainly, you can put concentration on accounting and English, or if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, then just put the semesters of the credits. One, then I'll let you finish up here. So I don't know if we get the best one here. If you worked in a highly technical industry and company, is it appropriate to have a description of the market under the employer's name on the resume, or should you assume, someone's going to know what that company does?
I have a strong opinion on this one. We see this a lot in resumes that have been done by like a big company for a layoff. And it makes the resume more about those companies than it does about the job seeker, I think. Is it necessary? Is it relevant for the reader to automatically recognize that company? Uh, Most of the time, no. It's more about you. If I'm an employer and I'm looking to hire someone, my going out on a limb is for you, the person. It 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 does matter where you worked, but not to the degree where you should be explaining to me what they do and where they're at in the market and things like that. I want to hear more about you and what you can offer that prospective employer. All right, we're going to jump in. We've got 5 minutes left. We've got 9 slides, and the accomplishment statements are really where it's at, folks. This is the nitty-gritty. This is the hard work, the time-consuming part. So ideally, you will seek out different action words to begin each accomplishment statement on your resume. Use the employer's action words to guide you. Let them know that you speak their language. Examples of action words can be found in long, long lists online. Just do a search for resume action words, or do a search for RN resume action words. For if you're just starting out and you really want a general resume just to post somewhere, you can do this and you can find lots of ideas. Or you can just get a few job descriptions that you're relatively interested in, and you can take the action words from them. Again, if you're starting from scratch and you want to put something general together, you can also use onedonline.org. I know Art put that in the chat box, and again, we'll be sending it out here in our speaker notes, so you'll have that. In email resume reviews, I often will alphabetize a list of the accomplishment statements to highlight repeated action verbs, because I want to impress upon the job seeker that knowing that redundancy can often be off-putting within resumes. It could be perceived as a sign of disorganization or a lack of attention to detail. And sometimes those repeated action words can indicate that you could combine statements. Or you can just simply right-click on the repeated word and check out a list of synonyms. Or you could go to thesaurus.com and find some synonyms. All right, phrases like responsible for or responsibilities included do not add value to your resume, nor do they allow you to reveal your unique experience doing those responsibilities. They can sound like they've been copied straight out of an internal position description from your last employer. So this is why we really teach about accomplishment statements, otherwise known as skill statements, impact statements, or power statements. You're speaking powerfully, aggressively, assertively versus passively. So carefully crafted accomplishment statements are how you make yourself stand out from other candidates by telling your own details of performing a certain skill or a certain task. So let us give you an example here. When assigned to the reception desks, one of the tasks is to answer phones. If you simply list answered phones as your statement, on a resume, it doesn't give the employer very much to go on. My guess is that everybody listening out there could answer a phone, right? So to make it into more of an accomplishment statement, you would need to add some details. You could say, answered and appropriately directed phone calls on a 6-line switchboard for 5 partner agencies and 40 to 50 staff. All right, so a little accomplishment statement activity. For the next slide, go ahead and open a blank word processing document or grab a writing utensil and paper, and there are going to be 2 tasks listed. So please prepare to write, reword, revise them into accomplishment statements, and then we'll have you share them with us in the chat. So as you work and you submit in the chat, let's review some accomplishment statement basics. Resume bullet points should be accomplishment statements, not just lists of duties. A laundry list is just that, a list. So it should be a combination of an action word, some details, and some results that really show your value to that next employer. That laundry list of duties to just unsubstantiated claims that don't ultimately sell you to that prospective employer. So work on building statements that really describe your unique experience performing that duty or exhibiting that skill, and strive to include very specific details. Now this can be hard. Not everybody has a log next to them when they're working, detailing every task they do, but try adding numbers by quantifying things. This will really enhance each statement, making it more effective. Ask yourself who, what, where, why, when, how often, in what situation, what project, what system overhaul, what software transition, what kind, how many, how often, roughly. You can do ranges, you can say up to, anything like that will help you go ahead and write these into accomplishment statements. And I'm going to just plow through here because we're at 11:01, I'm sorry. All right, so we would want to discuss some shared rewrites here, but writing and refining your accomplishment statements to target a required or a requirement or a qualifications list in a job posting is just one of the most time-consuming things you do in resume building. However, you can really take heart in knowing that all of the work that you're doing to build that effective targeted resume is really preparing you for your next interview. In fact, all of your job search activities are building blocks to that interview and your next job. So know that you are doing meaningful work as you take the time to really carefully construct these powerful quality accomplishment statements one by one. Do your best to draft these using a job posting as your guide, and then send your drafted resume along with that targeted job posting in for an interview. It really only takes one error of spelling or grammar to take your resume out of the consideration pile. So if you are using a simple text program without spell check, always paste your final product into Microsoft Word or another word processing software and run the grammar and spelling check before submission. If your resume is not winning you interviews, have it reviewed. All right, real quick, a couple minutes on cover letters. As mentioned at the beginning, please give yourself plenty of time when you're planning to apply for a position. I'll reiterate that an average application may take around an hour to complete, plus you'll need time to target your resume to the job posting and maybe about a half an hour to draft a short cover letter. I say short because we know that they're not always read, so you don't want to put a ton of time into these. Although some may say it's a formality or even obsolete, we encourage you, every resume needs to be accompanied by a cover letter. It's another chance to introduce yourself. Again, use the same name and contact information block as on your resume and address the letter to a specific person whenever possible. Always try to find an individual's name to address the letter to. And after exhausting all of your research angles to find a name, you could default to Dear Hiring Manager. Each letter that you put together should be targeted towards that specific job posting, and it should not repeat anything from your resume. Remember that unlike the resume, this is actually a chance to write in full sentences, so show off those skills. Avoid starting too many sentences with I or my if possible. Remember, the entire letter is about you by you, so no need to reiterate that fact with those personal pronouns. All right, and finally, to be honest, we don't know if cover letters are going to be read. They may or may not. So unless you're really familiar with the person or persons who are reviewing the application submissions, and you know their personal preferences and habits, you really have no idea. So just in case, do not repeat what's on your resume. Give them something new. Therefore, these cover letters might be short and to the point and easily skimmed, just like the resume. Maybe 3 paragraphs in total, no more than 3 to 5 sentences each. Indicate how you will follow up with the employer whenever possible. And then as you do that, make sure you mark it on your calendar and make that effort. Following through really helps you stand out. If you are asked to, go ahead and indicate salary requirements in the form of a range that comes from your research of local competitive wages. Make sure you proofread and edit your cover letter so that there are no mistakes. And here I'll just give a little plug that when you receive the slides and speaker notes, we have 5 different places that you can look up salary research so you can have those ranges that we spoke of. Okay, that is all we have for you today. It is 11:05. Thanks for hanging in there. We'll see you next time, and thanks for your participation and your attention. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. And by the way, great examples of accomplishment statements. They've been coming in privately and to everyone. Great job, everyone. I'll send you the follow-up information by the end of the day tomorrow. Thanks, Marnie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.